All right, everyone, get ready for a deep dive. Today, we're going deep into the case of Reinaldo Rivera.
Well, this is a fascinating one.
Yeah, this guy was a serial killer who was active in South Carolina and Georgia.
Right around the turn of the millennium.
Yeah, exactly. And we've got some Wikipedia excerpts here all about Rivera's life and crimes. And you know what's crazy is?
It's like he had this whole normal life on the surface.
Totally. Family, job, you name it.
But underneath, whole different story.
Oh, yeah. This deep dive's going to get dark. But I think we might also find some patterns in Rivera's actions that I think are going to surprise people.
For sure. It's like, how can someone live such a seemingly normal life
Right.
and then commit these horrific acts?
It's mind-boggling.
Makes you wonder about human nature, like what's really going on beneath the surface.
Absolutely. So let's start with Rivera's early life. He was born in Madrid, Spain. His family moved to Puerto Rico when he was 7.
Okay.
And he later joined the U.S. Navy. Served in Florida and California, and eventually even got a degree in office administration.
From the University of South Carolina.
That's right.
So, I mean, it sounds like he was really living the American dream, right?
Yeah, he gets a steady job as a tire inspector, gets married in 1993, and has 2 kids.
There's nothing in there on paper that suggests this capacity for the violence he would later inflict.
It's wild, right? Like you've got this totally ordinary life happening at the same time as these horrific crimes. Things start to get really dark in July of 1999 when 17-year-old Melissa Faye Dingus disappears.
From Grandville, South Carolina.
Right. Witnesses said they saw her with a man who looked like Rivera, and sadly, they found her remains a year later.
Near Harlem, Georgia.
Yeah.
This is where we start to see a pattern, right? Like in a lot of serial killer cases, there's a specific victim profile that the killer is drawn to. And for Rivera, it seems like it was young women.
Often seen with him right before they disappeared.
Exactly.
So then, just a few months after Melissa disappears, another 17-year-old, Tiffany Sharice Wilson, is abducted.
Oh, no.
Yeah, from a grocery store parking lot in North Augusta.
That's awful.
Yeah, and her 2-month-old daughter was found abandoned in the car.
Oh, my gosh.
Can you imagine the terror in that moment?
I can't even.
For both Tiffany and her baby. Later, Tiffany's body was found, and there were signs of rape and stabbing.
It's hard to comprehend, the level of brutality in these cases.
Right.
Especially leaving the infant behind.
Yeah.
It's like a complete disregard for human life.
It's heartbreaking. And then the pattern continues. In June of 2000, 18-year-old Tabitha Lee Bosdell vanishes.
Oh, no.
After being dropped off at a Huddle house in Augusta.
Another young woman alone.
It seems like Rivera targeted her, too. The sources don't go into detail about how she disappeared, but her skeletal remains were later identified.
Adding her to the list of Rivera's victims.
Exactly, and this repeated choice of young, often vulnerable women as victims.
It says a lot.
Yeah.
Investigators often use that to try to understand the killer's motive.
Makes sense.
And their psychological makeup.
It makes you wonder if his crimes would have just kept escalating.
Oh, absolutely.
If it hadn't been for his next victim, Chrisley Barton.
What happened with her?
Chrisley's story is unbelievable.
Really?
Yeah, we'll get into that after the break. So Chrisley Barton, it's October of 2000, and Rivera approaches her in a Huddle House parking lot. Get this. He's posing as the owner of an escort service and a modeling agency.
What?
I know, right? And he somehow convinces her to go back to her house.
Wow. So dangerous, thinking you're saving your own home and then...
And then that, yeah. You mentioned his MO earlier, and I think it's worth pausing for a sec to clarify what that is for our listeners.
Definitely. I mean, MO stands for modus operandi, which basically means like a criminal's way of operating. It's all the methods and actions you use when they commit a crime.
I see.
So investigators look at the MO to try and find patterns or even like signatures, things that can link different crimes together.
Or maybe even predict what they'll do next.
Exactly.
So in Rivera's case, luring Chrisley to her home, that's different.
Right, it's a change in his MO.
Like he wasn't abducting them from a public place anymore.
It could mean a few things.
Like what?
Maybe he was getting more confident, taking bigger risks.
Okay.
Or it could be desperation.
What do you mean?
Like maybe his old methods weren't working so well.
Ah, so he had to switch things up.
Yeah, maybe.
So Rivera attacks Chrisley in her own house. He rapes her and stabs her 3 times in the throat.
Oh my God, that's awful.
It's terrible, just brutal. But here's the thing. Chrisley survives.
Really?
Yeah, she fought back. And honestly, I think her survival was the key to catching Rivera.
She's incredibly brave.
Absolutely. And her testimony was crucial in connecting Rivera to all those other crimes. They eventually found him hiding out in a motel in South Carolina.
Did he resist?
He tried to kill himself when the police cornered him.
We see that sometimes in cases like this. It's like this person does these horrific things.
Yeah.
But they also have this, like, inner turmoil.
It's hard to wrap your head around, right?
Totally complicates things.
It really does. Okay, so let's talk about the trial. Rivera was convicted for Marnie Glissa's murder and the assault on Chrissy Barton.
Right.
But he wasn't convicted for the deaths of the other women.
But, I mean, the evidence was pretty clear, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. The pattern of victims, his MO, it all pointed to him. But during the trial, Rivera makes this crazy statement to the jury.
What did he say?
He says he's mentally ill, that he fantasizes about killing people, and if they let him go, he'll do it again. He even asks for the death penalty.
Whoa, that's a lot.
It is. It brings up all these legal and ethical questions.
Right, like was that a genuine plea? Or some kind of tactic to manipulate the jury?
It's tough to know for sure. And then it makes you think about, like, how does the justice system deal with mental illness?
It's a big question, right?
Huge. How do you draw the line between taking responsibility and, someone not being in their right mind?
It's a tough one.
It really is. In the end, the jury sentenced Rivera to death, and he's still on death row in Georgia. But speaking of the death penalty,
Oh,
it's a big topic.
yeah, a really polarizing issue.
And with Rivera actually asking for it?
It just adds another layer.
Totally. So let's talk about it. What are the arguments for and against the death penalty? How does Rivera's case fit into all of this?
All right, let's get into it.
All right, the death penalty, it's a topic that brings up a lot of strong opinions, on both sides.
Yeah, and it's not just theoretical, right? It has real consequences, especially for someone like Reinaldo Rivera sitting on death row.
Exactly. And remember, he actually asked for the death penalty during his trial.
Yeah, that was a curveball.
It's not something you see every day.
Definitely not. A defendant arguing for their own execution.
It's like he was saying, I'm mentally ill, I've got these fantasies, and if you let me out, I'll kill again, so just give me the death penalty.
It kind of throws a wrench into things, right?
Big time. Ethically, legally, it gets complicated.
So where do we even start with this? I guess we can unpack some of the main arguments around capital punishment.
Okay, yeah.
So on one side, you have the argument for retribution.
The eye for an eye idea.
Exactly. Basically, the punishment should fit the crime. So when someone takes a life, they lose their own right to live.
It's a viewpoint a lot of people hold, especially with crimes as awful as Rivera's.
Right, the pain and suffering he caused those victims and their families, it's hard to deny that.
But then there's the other side, the argument against capital punishment, just on principle.
Some people believe it's wrong for the state to take a life, no matter what.
It makes you think about the purpose of our justice system.
Right, like, is it all about punishment? Or is there room for rehabilitation, even in extreme cases like that?
And then there's the question of whether the death penalty actually stops crime from happening.
The research is kind of mixed on that one.
So where does Rivera's request for the death penalty fit in with all this?
It's a tough one. I mean, on the one hand, you could argue it makes things simpler. He's asking for it, so why not just grant his request?
Right.
But then you have to think about his mental state. Was he really thinking clearly when he asked for that? Was it what he really wanted? Or some way to manipulate the system?
The mess.
And it really forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about our justice system.
Yeah, no easy answers here. As we wrap up this deep dive into Rivera's case, I think we need to remember the victims.
Absolutely.
Their stories are the heart of all this. Melissa Faye Dingus, Tiffany Therese Wilson, Tabitha Lee Bosdell, Marnie Marie Glista, and Chrissy Button. They were daughters, mothers, friends, and their lives were cut short.
It's so important to remember them and honor their memory.
At the beginning, we talked about Rivera leading this double life. He had a family, a job, seemed normal.
Yeah.
But he had this dark side.
It's a reminder that you never really know what's going on with someone.
For sure. For anyone listening who wants to learn more, there's so much out there. The psychology of serial killers, the impact of these crimes on communities, the whole debate around the death penalty.
There's a lot to explore.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep those minds curious.